What happens, my friends, when you finally stop absorbing everyone's pain? This is not a simple shift in behavior, nor is it a matter of merely choosing to be less sensitive. It is a profound metamorphosis of the psyche, a transformation that strikes at the very roots of your unconscious participation in the suffering of others. The empathic soul, the soul that bleeds at every glance, that trembles at every whispered sorrow, is a soul that has for too long carried a burden that is not its own. And yet, it is not a mistake. It is not a flaw. It is the symptom of something ancient, something archetypal, something buried deep in the underworld of the human condition. You see, to absorb the pain of others is to unconsciously enact an ancient ritual, the scapegoat sacrifice. Across the centuries, the tribe projected its sin, its shadows, its unbearable agony onto the chosen one, who then carried it into exile or to death. But within your own life, this scapegoat is no longer a separate body. It is you, the one who listens, the one who cannot turn away, the one who feels the sharp edge of others' wounds cutting into your own flesh. You have lived in this ancient theater without knowing it, serving as both priest and victim. Now, imagine what occurs when you step away from the altar, when you no longer receive into your body and soul the suffering that belongs to others, but allow it to return to the places from which it was born. The shift is seismic, and it shakes not only the surface of your conscious life, but the foundations of your unconscious being. For the unconscious has long trained you to respond to others' pain as though it were your own, weaving you into a web of projections and identifications, the mother's sorrow, the father's unspoken grief, the ancestral shame. All these have flowed through you as though you were their vessel. When you cease this absorption, you do not become cold or cruel. No, you awaken to a different form of compassion, one rooted not in possession by the other's pain, but in the recognition of their wholeness. You begin to see that to carry another's suffering is to deny them the sacred confrontation with their own shadow. You rob them of the possibility of transformation, for suffering, though cruel, is a crucible in which the soul is tempered. If you carry it for them, you steal the fire that was meant to transmute them. But this awakening does not come gently. The first experience of refusing to absorb is often terror. You feel guilt, as though by not taking their pain into yourself, you are abandoning them. This guilt is the voice of the archetype of the martyr, whispering that your value lies only in sacrifice. You may even feel as though you are betraying your very identity, because the sensitive one, the healer, the listener, has built an entire self-image on the ability to suffer vicariously. To refuse is to dismantle the mask you have worn since childhood. In dreams, such moments are often symbolized by images of blood that suddenly stops flowing, of wounds that close, of masks that crack. Perhaps you dream of a theater where the play halts and the actors look confused, awaiting your cue. But you no longer step onto the stage. This is the psyche dramatizing your refusal to play the ancient role, and though the audience boos, though the chorus cries for continuation, you remain silent. This is the threshold of individuation. The courage to stop enacting the collective script. Do you know what you encounter when you stand still, no longer absorbing? You encounter your own pain, the one you have hidden beneath the weight of others. For all the borrowed sorrows you have carried were, in truth, a diversion. They allowed you to avoid facing the more intimate wound, the primal wound of your own soul. When you finally set down the sack of others' grief, you feel the sharp sting of your own. It rises unmediated, unmasked, demanding to be known. This is why so many who stop absorbing fall first into despair. They say, I thought I would feel lighter, freer. Instead, I feel heavier, lonelier, rough. But this is the necessary descent, for you are no longer floating in the ocean of collective agony, dispersed and dissolved in others. You are standing on the shore of your own unconscious, gazing into the abyss of your singular suffering. And this suffering is sacred, for it is the key to your individuality. When I speak of shadow, I do not mean only the darkness you despise in yourself. I mean also the treasures you have hidden there. By carrying others' pain, you have buried your own rage, your own passion, your own unacknowledged desires. These are now breaking through, rising with volcanic force, and you may tremble at their intensity. But understand, the psyche never presents to you what you cannot, in some way, integrate. The eruption is violent only because the repression has been so total. In this moment, you must listen to your dreams. The dream is the map of the unconscious, the whispering guide that shows you what has been hidden. You may dream of wild animals, once caged, now prowling. You may dream of neglected children, crying to be held. You may dream of endless staircases, spiraling downwards, leading you into subterranean chambers where forgotten figures wait. Each of these is a fragment of your soul, waiting for you to reclaim it. And so, the shift is not simply the cessation of absorbing others' pain, it is the beginning of absorbing your own. This is the paradox. You thought you were selfless, but in truth, you were fleeing the self. Now, in refusing to carry what is not yours, you must bear fully what is. And in this bearing, you begin the alchemical process. Pain, when truly suffered, is not stagnant. It transforms, it reveals meaning, it becomes the very fire that forges the self. But beware, my friends, of the temptation to swing to the opposite extreme. Some, upon awakening, harden themselves, cutting off empathy, declaring themselves free of all ties. They become stone, and though they believe they have transcended suffering, they have merely entombed themselves. This is not individuation, but petrification. The true path lies in balance. To feel the other without absorbing, to witness without becoming possessed, to love without crucifixion. This balance is symbolized in alchemy by the figure of the king and queen united, holding the opposites in tension. In psychological terms, it is the union of ego and self, where the conscious learns to hold the unconscious without being devoured by it. You do not dissolve into the sea of collective pain, nor do you barricade yourself in the fortress of isolation. You walk the narrow bridge, suspended over the abyss, carrying within you both compassion and boundary, both openness and sovereignty. And here, something miraculous occurs. When you no longer absorb, you discover a deeper resonance. Instead of drowning in others' pain, you begin to see their symbolic significance. You see that the man's anger is not merely anger, but a manifestation of his unclaimed shadow. You see that the woman's grief is not only grief, but an initiation into her deeper self. You see archetypes moving through people like actors wearing costumes. You witness, but you do not collapse. And in witnessing, you become a mirror, a presence that reflects without distortion. This is the true healer, not the one who carries your wound for you, but the one who stands firm as you confront it yourself. Do you feel the difference in this presence? It is not heavy, not burdened, not drained. It radiates, it illuminates, and others sense it, though they may not understand it. They feel seen, not absorbed. They feel held, not hijacked. And some will resist, for they crave the old dynamic. They want you to carry them, to bleed for them, to suffer in their place. When you refuse, they may accuse you of being selfish, cold, uncaring, but this accusation is the cry of the archetype as it loses its victim. You must endure it, for on the other side is freedom. Freedom not only for you, but for them, for when you no longer absorb, you return responsibility to its rightful owner. You give others the dignity of their own suffering, the chance to wrestle with their own shadow, to be transformed by their own fire. This is love, though it is not the sentimental love of fusion. It is the fierce love of individuation, which knows that each soul must walk through its own darkness to find its own light. The shift, then, is not merely psychological, it is spiritual. It is a movement from unconscious identification with the collective to conscious alignment with the self. It is the birth of true compassion, which is not pity, not martyrdom, but presence. And in this presence, you find a serenity that is not numbness, but luminous stillness. As the shift deepens, you begin to notice something peculiar in the silence that follows your refusal to absorb. At first, the silence feels foreign, almost unbearable, because you were accustomed to the ceaseless noise of other people's emotions reverberating inside you like echoes in a vast cavern. When the echoes vanish, you hear, for the first time, the sound of your own soul. It is not a shout, not a command, but a whisper, delicate, trembling, yet undeniable. And it says, I am here. I have always been here. Will you finally listen? This is the moment when many recoil, because the voice of the soul does not flatter, it does not soothe you with the illusions you have carried. It tells you truths you have spent decades hiding from beneath the veil of empathy. It may tell you that you became a sponge for others' pain because you were terrified of your own loneliness. It may reveal that your compassion was, in part, a mask for fear of abandonment. It may show you that the shadow you tried to escape by merging with others is still waiting patiently in the dark, smiling, knowing that sooner or later you must meet it face to face. But this is not cruelty. The soul does not mock. It calls you to wholeness. And wholeness is always uncomfortable because it requires you to accept what you have denied. Imagine a dream where you are walking through a house, and in every room there are fragments of yourself, an angry child in one, a seductive figure in another, a weeping old man in another. Each time you open a door, you want to close it, for the sight is disturbing. But the dream insists, walk further, look deeper, do not flee. This is what the psyche demands once you stop using others' pain as a shield. It is here that the archetypes rise in new forms. You encounter the wounded healer, that figure who taught you to minister to others while avoiding your own wound. You confront the sacrificial lamb who carried the sins of the tribe into exile. You meet the shadow which wears the faces of those you have feared or hated. And perhaps you even glimpse the self, the radiant archetype of totality, shimmering beyond the chaos, like a distant star pulling you toward a destiny you have barely begun to understand. Do not think this confrontation is a single moment. It unfolds over time as waves that rise and recede. At first, the wave may crash violently, filling you with despair, confusion, even rage. You wonder why you chose to stop absorbing others, for now you feel consumed by yourself. But as the wave recedes, you see that something has been left behind on the shore, a fragment of meaning, a glimmer of strength, a memory that finally makes sense. Each cycle carries you deeper, and though the ocean is terrifying, you begin to trust its rhythm. The paradox, again, is that by not carrying others, you actually become more capable of standing with them, not as a victim, not as a substitute sufferer, but as a companion. You can look into another's eyes and see their storm without being dragged into it. You can hold their hand without drowning. You can say, yes, I see your darkness, without taking it into yourself. This is true empathy, resonance without collapse, compassion without possession. And when others sense this presence in you, they begin to respond differently. Some are unsettled. They depended on your old role, your readiness to bleed for them, your willingness to disappear so they could feel lighter. They will resist your transformation because it forces them to face their own pain. They may withdraw or lash out or call you selfish. But others, those who are truly ready, will feel liberated. They will realize that you are not abandoning them, but empowering them. reflecting their strength back to them. In your refusal to absorb, you have given them back their dignity. This is the essence of individuation, the separation of what belongs to you from what belongs to the other, without severing the bond of shared humanity. Individuation is not isolation. It is not a fortress. It is a dance of boundaries and openness, where each soul maintains its unique rhythm while still moving in harmony with the cosmic music. And this harmony is possible only when each instrument plays its own notes, not when one violin absorbs the sound of the entire orchestra. Here I must speak of the collective, for the empath is not only an individual phenomenon, but a symptom of our time. We live in an age of psychic contagion, where emotions spread faster than reason, where the pain of the world floods every channel of communication. In such an age, those who absorb are overwhelmed, suffocated, broken. But when you stop absorbing, you become something else, a vessel not of contagion, but of clarity. You become like the hermit in the tower, holding the lantern not to carry the world's suffering, but to illuminate the path through it. This is why your transformation is not only personal, but archetypal. You are enacting a shift for the collective psyche. When one empath refuses to collapse, a new possibility emerges in the field of consciousness. Others see it, even unconsciously, and they begin to realize that suffering need not be contagious, that it can be witnessed without being consumed, that wholeness is not the annihilation of pain, but the integration of it. But let me warn you, the old energies will not release you easily. The archetypes demand sacrifice, and when you step out of the scapegoat role, they will howl. Dreams may come filled with accusations. You abandon your family. You betray your tribe. You are unworthy of love. These are the voices of the inner persecutor, the remnants of centuries of unconscious identification with the sacrificial pattern. You must endure them, for endurance is itself transformative. Each time you refuse to collapse, you strengthen the self's hold on your psyche, and slowly something astonishing begins to happen. The pain that once felt unbearable, when absorbed, now becomes luminous. When observed, you see patterns where before there was only chaos. You see meaning where before there was only agony. You understand that pain, like shadow, is not an enemy but a teacher. It points you to what is missing, what has been denied, what is longing to be integrated. Pain becomes symbolic, and once it becomes symbolic, it becomes bearable. This is the alchemy of the psyche, turning lead into gold, turning raw suffering into insight, turning unconscious possession into conscious presence. And the gold is not only for you, it radiates outward, invisible, yet palpable. Others feel safer around you. Though you have not absorbed their pain, they feel seen. Though you have not sacrificed yourself, they feel hope. Though you have not given them answers, this is because your presence, aligned with the self, becomes a beacon. The self is not simply the center of the psyche, it is the center and circumference, the spark of divinity within, the archetype of wholeness. To live in alignment with the self is to live in resonance with the cosmic order. And when you no longer absorb the pain of others, you begin to hear the self more clearly. You begin to live not as a fragment tossed about by waves, but as one who has found the axis mundi, the axis of the world around which all turns. Do not mistake this for perfection. You will still stumble, you will still feel the tug to absorb the old reflex rising in moments of weakness, but each time you choose differently, you carve a new path in the unconscious, a new pattern for your being. Over time, this path becomes natural. The martyr archetype loosens its grip, and the true healer archetype emerges, not the healer who sacrifices, but the healer who reflects, who guides, who empowers. And so the shift is not an escape, but a return to yourself, to your soul, to the wholeness that was waiting behind the borrowed suffering. You are no longer a sponge, but a mirror, no longer a scapegoat, but a guide, no longer lost in the noise of others, but attuned to the music of your own being. And as you continue, you discover that the greatest gift you can give the world is not your suffering, but your wholeness. For wholeness radiates, wholeness heals, wholeness transforms. When you reach this stage of the journey, where you are no longer bound to the reflex of absorbing, you begin to feel a strange expansion within yourself. It is as though an inner horizon, long hidden by fog, begins to clear. You recognize that you have lived much of your life as though you were a vessel constantly filled and emptied by forces beyond your control. Now, for the first time, you begin to feel like a source, not a sponge, but a spring. This shift cannot be understood by the rational intellect alone. It is mystical in its texture, archetypal in its resonance. Think of the ancient myth of Inanna's descent into the underworld. She goes down, stripped of her garments, her ornaments, her powers, until she is naked before the Queen of the Dead. She dies, and only through that death does she rise again, renewed in your refusal to absorb. You too have descended. You have been stripped of the garments of martyrdom, the ornaments of false compassion, the mask of the ever-giving one. Now you stand naked before your own depths, and though it feels like death, it is the seed of resurrection. The psyche does not forgive avoidance. What is denied in one area always emerges in another. This is why so many who absorb others' pain develop ailments of the body or the soul, fatigue, illness, depression. The burden they carry cannot vanish. It only shifts form. But when you no longer absorb, the energy that once turned against you begins to return as vitality. What was once sickness becomes potential. You discover energy you did not know you had. You find creativity bubbling where once there was exhaustion. You feel impulses toward expression, toward art, toward love, toward truth. It is as though the unconscious, long clogged with the debris of borrowed suffering, begins to flow again. Dreams shift. They are no longer endless dramas of rescue and sacrifice. Instead, they become visions of building, of creation, of integration. You may dream of constructing a house, of planting a garden, of weaving a tapestry. These are not mere fantasies. They are symbols of the new work of your psyche. To build, to plant, to weave your own life, rather than dissolving into the lives of others. Yet beware the subtle temptation of inflation. When the empath stops absorbing, they may feel such an upsurge of energy that they mistake it for divinity itself. They may feel chosen, superior, untouchable. But this is a trick of the ego, a reaction to years of diminishment. Inflation is as dangerous as absorption, for it blinds you to your limits and lures you into the role of savior once again. Only now, on a grander scale, true transformation is humbler. It acknowledges both the greatness of the self and the smallness of the ego. It bows before the mystery, recognizing that to channel the archetypal does not make one a god, but a servant of the divine pattern. The self does not ask you to inflate, it asks you to align, and alignment is quieter, subtler, more enduring. It is like the tree that grows steadily, rooted deep in the soil of the unconscious, reaching upward toward the light of consciousness. The tree does not boast, nor does it collapse under the weight of every storm. It stands season after season, a living symbol of wholeness. Now, let us turn to the relational dimension of this shift. For much of your life, your relationships were shaped by the dynamic of absorption. You attracted those who poured into you their pain, their chaos, their unresolved wounds, and you, unconsciously, welcomed it, for it gave you purpose, identity, belonging. But once you stop absorbing, these relationships change dramatically. Some dissolve, unable to survive without the old pattern. Others are transformed, deepened, purified. You begin to attract different souls, souls who are not seeking to be carried but to walk beside you, souls who resonate with your wholeness rather than your wounds. This is the mystery of psychological resonance. Like attracts like. When you were a sponge, you attracted floods. Now that you are a spring, you attract other springs, and together you form rivers, flowing not from depletion but from abundance. This shift in relationships often brings grief, for you must release those who were once central to your life. You may feel nostalgia, longing, even guilt as you step away. But remember, you are not abandoning them. You are refusing to participate in a pattern that destroys both of you. To carry them was not love. It was a form of collusion with their unconscious to stand in your wholeness, even if it means separation, is the greater love. though it burns. And what of the collective? You will find that once you stop absorbing, the pain of the world does not vanish. In fact, you may feel it more acutely, because you are no longer numbing yourself with borrowed sorrows, but you experience it differently. It does not drown you. It speaks to you. It becomes a message, a symbol, a call to action. You see that the wars, the injustices, the cries of the earth are not yours to absorb, but ours to witness and transform together. You become an agent of change, not by collapsing, but by standing. At this stage, you may feel a deepening connection to archetypal images of the healer, the sage, the mystic. You may find yourself drawn to symbols of fire, of light, of vision. These are not accidents. The unconscious speaks in images, and these images are showing you the new role you are to embody, not the sacrificial victim, but the luminous witness, not the sponge, but the flame, not the scapegoat, but the guide. This guide role is not glamorous. It requires solitude, patience, and continual self-examination, for the unconscious never ceases its work. Even after the shift, old shadows may return, new temptations may arise, but each time you meet them with awareness, you deepen your alignment with the self. The path of individuation is not a straight line, but a spiral. You return to the same themes, the same struggles, but each time at a higher octave, with greater wisdom. And what ultimately is the fruit of this shift? It is not a life without pain, nor a life without conflict. It is a life of meaning, for when you no longer absorb, you discover that suffering, both yours and others, is not meaningless chaos, but part of a vast pattern, a cosmic drama in which each soul is called to awaken. You begin to see the hand of the archetypal in every event, the whisper of the divine in every shadow. Life becomes symbolic, and the symbolic is inexhaustibly rich. This richness infuses even your smallest acts. A conversation, a dream, a moment of silence, all shimmer with depth. You are no longer anesthetized by the flood of others' pain, nor consumed by it. You are awake, and in that awakening, you touch the mystery that lies at the heart of all existence, that the self, the divine spark, seeks to manifest through you, not as absorption, but as wholeness. When you live from this awakened posture, the world itself begins to appear differently. It is not merely a collection of events, not merely the endless drama of people's pains and desires. It becomes a living text, a sacred manuscript, in which every symbol, every encounter, every dream, and every emotion is written with meaning. You realize that to stop absorbing is not to stop feeling, but to start seeing. Feeling becomes vision, and vision becomes wisdom. You may walk through a crowded street and notice the sorrow etched into faces, but it does not crush you. Instead, it speaks to you of the archetypal burdens humanity has yet to integrate. You see the weary man not only as a man, but as the eternal figure of Atlas, carrying the world on his shoulders. You see the grieving woman not only as an individual, but as the great mother mourning the loss of her children through the ages. You see archetypes moving through flesh and blood, and you realize that you are part of a much larger story. This recognition does not make the suffering less real, it makes it more meaningful. The ego always wants to fix, to solve, to rescue, but the self wants to reveal, and when you no longer absorb, you can serve the self's purpose. You can allow another's pain to be seen for what it is, a stage in their individuation, a call from their unconscious, a symbol of transformation waiting to happen in your presence. They are not robbed of their suffering, but invited to discover its meaning. This is the great paradox. To stop carrying is to start truly helping. Do you understand now why this shift is so radical, so unsettling? Because it overturns the ancient script of the sacrificial victim. For millennia, cultures have enacted this drama of projection, casting out one to carry the sins of many. But you, when you stop absorbing, you refuse the role. You say no to the unconscious demand for sacrifice. You embody a new possibility, where each one carries their own shadow, and in carrying it, becomes whole. This is why the unconscious resists so fiercely. It is not only your personal unconscious. You are confronting, but the collective in dreams. This moment may appear as rebellion. You may dream of breaking out of prison, of walking off a battlefield while others shout at you to return, of refusing to kneel before a king. These dreams are images of the soul's liberation from archaic patterns. They remind you that to individuate is always to rebel, not against life, but against the tyranny of unconscious repetition. And yet, this rebellion is not violent. It does not destroy, it transforms. By refusing to absorb, you do not abandon compassion. You purify it. You no longer confuse compassion with possession, love with self-erasure, healing with martyrdom. Compassion becomes luminous clarity, a gaze that sees the other without losing the self. Love becomes a force that unites without devouring. Healing becomes the courage to stand in truth, even when truth demands separation or silence. This transformation touches every layer of your being. In the body, you feel less heaviness, less inexplicable fatigue. You may notice that your breath deepens, that your chest expands, that your muscles soften. The body, long weighed down by borrowed burdens, begins to move with greater freedom. In the psyche, you feel less confusion, less entanglement. Thoughts become clearer, emotions less overwhelming. In the spirit, you feel more attuned to mystery, more receptive to synchronicities, more connected to the silent guidance of the self. And what of the future? For many who undergo this shift, there comes a new sense of calling. Having lived for so long as a vessel of others' pain, They now ask, what is mine to give? What is mine to create? This is the great question of individuation. Not how do I serve others by erasing myself, but how do I serve the world by becoming fully myself? The answer is never generic. It emerges uniquely for each soul through dreams, through desires, through the symbolic language of the unconscious, but it always involves expression. The energy once bound in absorption is released as creativity, as vision, as service. Some write, others paint, others teach, others heal in new ways. The form matters less than the source. What matters is that the gift comes not from depletion, but from wholeness, not from guilt, but from freedom, not from fear, but from love. This gift, born of individuation, is the true contribution of the awakened soul to the collective. And so I say to you, when you finally stop absorbing everyone's pain, you do not become less human. You become more human, for humanity is not defined by how much we can suffer for one another, but by how deeply we can become ourselves in relation to one another. Wholeness is not selfish. It is the very ground of true community. Only when each one carries their own shadow can we walk together in authenticity. Only when each one finds their own self can we meet as equals, not as parasites and hosts, not as victims and saviors, but as souls on the shared journey of becoming. Do not be afraid, then, of the accusations that will come. Do not fear the loneliness that may follow. These are signs that you are walking the path of the self, the narrow path that leads not to comfort but to truth. Trust your dreams, trust the whispers of your soul, trust the synchronicities that appear when you align with your deeper destiny. The shift is real, and though it shakes the very foundations of who you thought you were, it carries you toward who you truly are. And when one day you look back, you will see that the years of absorbing were not wasted. They taught you sensitivity, attunement, depth, but they were only the beginning. They were the chrysalis, and now you are breaking free. The butterfly does not despise the cocoon, it honors it. Even as it leaves it behind, so too must you honor your past while stepping boldly into your future. The soul does not want you to drown in others' pain. It wants you to awaken to your own wholeness. It wants you to live not as a victim of archetypes, but as a conscious partner in the unfolding of the mystery. It wants you to see that to stop absorbing is not to stop loving, but to start loving more truly. And so I leave you with this. Do not carry what is not yours. Carry what is. Carry your own shadow, your own pain, your own destiny. For in carrying these, you discover the self, and in discovering the self, you discover the secret that has been whispered through the ages, through dreams, through symbols, through myths, that wholeness is the true medicine, and that in becoming whole, you heal not only yourself but the world.